Yeah, hello. Welcome to our fourth video of 100 Great Paintings of Western Art History. I am J.S. Bird, and I am your guide through these images. Thanks for being here. Please consider subscribing and liking, and please leave comments. Let me know what you think about the work. Let me know what you think about the comments of the work. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What are your thoughts about these paintings, or any paintings, or painting in general? Let me know what's up out there. We're going to start off with number 70 in this list by a painter named Giambono. Christ as the Man of Sorrows from 1430. And where are we in 1430? We are in Europe, and we are in the Dark Ages, the time of the Inquisition. It is the time of the plague. It is the time of suffering. And here we have an image of suffering. So this is such an evocative image of Christ. And what is Christ actually doing in this painting? It's not clear. Is he being resurrected? Is he dying? Is he crucified? Not exactly crucified. It is not really clear what exactly is happening to Christ in this painting. We see the cross with the nails, but we also see the tomb. And what we see is suffering. So as we look at this face and this skin, and you think about the time, the plague, the bodies, this looks like a corpse. The skin is greenish. The skin is speckled. His face is lifeless. And that is juxtaposed with that beautiful halo, that beautiful gold and red, beautifully crafted halo surrounding his corporeal body, right? So we have the sacred and the profane, the heavenly and the earthly juxtaposed. And of course, he is framed by that wooden carved gold leaf frame. Again, this sort of sacred space that the suffering occurs in. Hauntingly beautiful, right? Beautifully painted, beautifully rendered, beautifully evocative. So many artists have worked in that space, that dance. And this is a great example of that dance. Our next painting is actually a series of 12 paintings, and each of those paintings are 84 inches by 120 inches. So those are big paintings. We're talking about 7 feet by 10 feet, and there are 12 of these paintings. This title of this series is Lepanto, and this is by an artist named Cy Twombly. Now, this piece actually depicts the naval battles where a coalition of Spanish, Venetian, and Papal troops defeated the much larger fleet of the Ottoman Empire. So we see here, there's a kind of sequence of the battle, of ships arriving and ships in battle and the aftermath of this battle. That is the history of this painting. I want to talk about the way the painting looks with all those drips and that slashy, aggressive, bold, spontaneous style. What is something someone can say about this work? Oh, it looks like a kid did it. And in some ways it does look like a kid did it. However, a kid is not going to make 12 7 by 10 foot paintings with a consistent aesthetic. A kid is not going to understand how to use the entire rectangle for each of these paintings and how these paintings relate to each other and yet stand individually, right? So with each of these 12 paintings, they have to relate to each other and work together, but at the same time, they have to be their own individual piece. Now, the other thing I want to say about painting like a kid, if you think it's easy, try it. It is not easy. Here's the reason it's not easy. You cannot be self-conscious at all. A 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid, hopefully, when they draw, they are not self-conscious. They absolutely believe in the act of drawing as an end in itself. It's not about something else, it's about itself. This is the sun, the kid says. They don't say this looks like the sun. They say this is the sun. There's an inherent belief in the power of making the mark. And so as an adult artist, one has to recover that belief in making the mark. That I am making those scratches and scribbles and drips because they have value in and of themselves. And that's actually what I'm creating. I am creating the mark of an artist without self-consciousness. If you think that's easy, try it. Now, the other thing about these pieces is there's such a beautiful balance between drawing and painting, and a beautiful balance between active and rest, and busy and not busy. So some of the paintings are fuller than other paintings, and some of the paintings are emptier than other paintings, and some of the paintings have a lot of color, a kind of triadic red, blue, yellow color scheme, which creates color discord, and some of them have less color, and some of them have analogous color. So here we see a very busy, drippy one with triadic color, which creates a tremendous amount of energy. That's the battle, right? That's the conflict. Those colors conflicting with each other. Those drips are the blood. The ships are being blown up and destroyed and sinking. So it's a beautiful homage to the tradition of painting, yet done in a way that is really unique and very postmodern and very, very spontaneous and elegant. I'm going to have more videos about Cy Twombly in the future, shorter videos discussing Cy Twombly's work. Because again, it's the kind of art that many people are suspicious of. And I want to get into that discussion a little deeper in subsequent videos. Number 68, Adolf von Menzel, Studio Wall, 1872. Now I have to admit, when I started this series of finding these 100 paintings, I did not know who this artist was. I discovered this artist in this process, and I discovered this painting in this process. And this is such a cool, creepy painting. It's really simply a study of plaster anatomical cast that an artist would use to learn about anatomy and portraiture. And yet, he's presented it with that low light, strong light, chiaroscuro light on the studio wall with these varied colors in this beautiful, expressionistic, loose brushwork. I want to remind you, this is 1874. This is just the very beginning of artists learning how to loosen brushwork. And so what this artist is doing, somewhat ahead of his time, is creating a kind of loose gestural brushwork, and yet still creating this really delineated, strong form using light and dark. And he's managing both of those things very, very beautifully. And in this case, in a very kind of creepy, almost supernatural way. And I have no idea how much of that was intended or if he's just sort of experimenting with light. But it does have that kind of gruesome, macabre feel to it, which was quite unlike most of the work being done at that time. '67, Francesco Goya, The Dog. 1819 to 23, because no one's exactly sure when he made it. 51 inches by 31 inches. So this is what's called one of the dark paintings or one of the black paintings, which were actually painted in his house on the wall after he was no longer a court painter. He sort of removed himself from society and removed himself from the court. Part of that, he did not believe in the court system and the hierarchy of feudalism, right? And the court system and the imbalance of power that comes out of that. So what's quite interesting about this painting is the emptiness of it, the minimalness of it, at a time when 99.9% of artists had no interest or understanding about emptiness or about minimalism or about the sublime. And so how does he take basically three things and make an image out of it, right? Sky, earth, dog head. It's very unique for the time. And so that dog just seems overwhelmed with that rough space. By rough, I mean it's painted rough. It's atmospheric, but it's rough. It's physical. And again, this is one of the main aspects of painting, especially modern and postmodern painting, is how does one paint space, but at the same time paint a physical surface? Paying attention to both things, right? Creating an illusion of space or depth or form, but at the same time creating flat marks that live on a canvas, or in this case, on a wall. And so there's that dog that actually symbolizes human loneliness, grief, angst, overwhelming sensations, right? That probably so many people feel in our current society. And there it is from centuries ago in a very minimal, straightforward, and symbolic way. '66, Joseph Wright of Derby. Experiment on a bird in the air pump. 1768, 72 inches by 94 inches, so a very large easel painting, which is very common at the time. Using a brown, sort of a brown chiaroscuro tenebrism space with color laid into the brown ground. So we have a very, very, very traditional way of painting, working from dark to light, working from brown to color. But what a strange image. So the first thing to notice is that it is kind of built on the Renaissance pyramid, where, we have a sort of triangular shape with the pyramid top, triangle top, apex in the middle where the central figure's hand is, holding, that jar with there's a bird in it. So this was the Age of Enlightenment. So here we have a kind of, experiment of humans controlling nature, right? Which, of course, we know has gotten us into all kinds of trouble. But this is the Age of Enlightenment. So we're learning about science. Science is being born in some ways. But wow, the detail, the tightness, the rendering, the light in this painting is fabulous. Every little bit of it, even the subtle wood grains and architectural forms in the back, right up to the hairs and the cloth and the skin and the bird and that light on each person creating that beautiful form, all unified and connected through that dark brown, which is very much a Baroque kind of tradition, elegantly painted, absolutely crisply seen and rendered, and just what craftsmanship, what beautiful craftsmanship, organization, to have all of those figures in one painting and yet unify that painting. And that's unified, if you look at it, through a whole series of diagonals from the boy on the right down up to the crying girl, down the guy's arm, up to the bird, down the other guy's arm, down his front, over to the woman who's in front looking back, up to the woman with the bonnet, and down. You see these almost like a mountain range of diagonals, and all those diagonals hold that painting and all of those figures and all of those poses together into one unified, gorgeous composition. So we're going to take a bit of intermission, and we're going to look through a few paintings that are still to come in this discussion of 100 great paintings. I want to address, what the idea of a great painting. So I see many, many videos on YouTube, how to do this, how to do that, how to make an abstract painting, how to make a face. People, there are no easy answers. Making great art is really difficult. And when I say great art, what I'm really talking about is art that somehow changes the discipline of art, changes the way we view art, and specifically in this case, painting. And these two paintings we just looked at do that. How does it extend the discipline? How does it change the conversation? How does it capture the present moment, aesthetically, philosophically, politically? It's one thing to learn how to do a formula to make a face. It's another thing to paint a face in a way that's never been painted before, like Jenny Saville, for example. It's really difficult. There are no shortcuts. Artists who make great art have mastered at least one element, and invariably multiple elements of technique, style, seeing, composition, mastery of form, use of light, use of materials, on and on and on. It takes time, it takes repetition, it is difficult. One has to sort of commit their life to this to really be a great artist. Just like to really be a great football player or to really be a great ballerina or really be a great writer. Many people can write a mystery, but who extends how we think of the genre of mystery? That's the difference. Are you creating something that is sort of a formula and totally known, or are you creating something that is new and people don't really quite understand yet? That's the difference. And so the last thing I want to say about this, if you are looking at art online, or preferably in a gallery, in a real, where you actually see the actual art, and you don't understand it, the question isn't to ask, what's wrong with this art? The question to ask is, what do I not know yet about art? All right, we're moving on to 65. Very well-known artist, Edgar Degas. Carriage at the Races. Maybe not such a well-known painting by Degas, though. 1871. One of the things I wanted to do with this series is not pick the same old paintings that people always pick. So usually if you see Degas, you're going to see a ballerina. This painting definitely shows us some things about Degas where he was a master at. And one thing is the odd cropping of his imagery. So we see how the carriage is cut off and the horses are cut off. The nose of the horse and the legs of the horse are cut off. And the carriage on the left is cut off. That sort of weird cropping as if we're looking through a frame. Sometimes people call that a keyhole effect, like you're looking through a keyhole and you can't see the whole thing. And this is a great example of that. And then the mere fact that he puts all of that information into the lower third of the painting, not the top, right? Not the half, not the middle, not 3/4, but the lower third is where all of the information is. And then there's only very few things that break that boundary, right? 3 trees, the umbrella point, the little dog, and the man, and the horse's head, right? Those are the only things that break that. And it's sort of like, well, we got 3 things over here on the left, 3 little trees, and then 3 odd things over here where we have the dog, the man, and the horse's heads. And of course, by putting that man as the highest thing that breaks that horizon line, he becomes the most important thing. And then he has that line of the whip. I assume that's a whip for the horses that bisects that man, which actually creates even more attention to him. So he's sort of the focal point from which all things emerge. And you notice that that little whip makes a V shape with the dog, which is kind of cool, right, to get those opposing angles. The other thing about Degas' work here, somewhat influenced from Manet, is the black, the flat black, right, that actually came from Asian art, where things get simplified and almost like a silhouette and flattened out. So we have that flat black opposed with those colored, more complex colored surfaces. There's a lot of complexity in the color and a kind of simpleness in the black. And there's a nice juxtaposition of those things. And then the last thing is his focus on shape. And for example, the shape of that carriage with that angle that comes out, and then there's the little horse that's sort of standing on the little angle, not literally, but looks like it's standing on the little angle of the carriage is really cool. And how that takes us up to, where the tents are and where the people are. But that shape of the carriage and around the wheel, and then there's a really cool shape above the horse's back to the right of the man, right? That's just that green shape of the lawn with those people in it, which sort of break up that shape. If you just really start thinking about things as shapes, not as objects, the shape of the hat, the shape of the dog, the shape of the carriage, the shape of the umbrella, the shape of the horses, how they're positioned. You can see his fascination with shape and the power of shape and how something actually becomes a unique, powerful shape rather than just an object, and that includes the negative shapes within that grass. And that, of course, led to modernism, thinking in a modernistic way, and which leads to abstract painting where the shapes become more important than the subject or the object of the shape, which is a huge aspect of modern art. '64, Mark Tansey. Rob Grillet, Cleansing Every Object, 1981, 72 by 72 inches. So Mark Tansey's a thinker. He's sort of a conceptual painter. He comes up with an idea, and then he presents that idea in a unique way, and he uses monochromatic color, which means, one basic hue. So he'll make a painting that's a basic blue color, or a basic red color, or in this case, a basic brown sienna color. And then he'll create lights and darks of that one color. And he is so interested in philosophy and modernism and postmodernism and the differences and similarities between them, and sort of the way critics talk and thought and wrote about those subjects. So this man here who you see scrubbing a rock is actually a French filmmaker and was part of this postmodern idea that, he was of the belief, this postmodern idea, that there is no such thing as symbolism, right? That things just are what they are. And you can't really symbolize something greater. That's not actually an authentic thing to be able to achieve. It just is what it is. And when you notice, when we zoom in here, he's not just scrubbing rocks, he's scrubbing history. He's scrubbing history of meaning. So you might see a cow. To the right of him, you'll see a stone that's actually a cow. That's Courbet. That's a reference to Courbet's paintings and the meaning that Courbet was inserting into his paintings. And we also see down here, these other rocks below the cow are actually, of Greco-Roman architecture and the symbolism that was built into that. And then you might see down below to the right, at a pure angle from his knee, if you follow his knee down, you'll see a cube, a pyramid, and a circle or a sphere, which goes directly to Cezanne and his concept of painting, and which was the birth of modernism, right? Cezanne's work, in some ways, is sort of the very birth of true modernism. So he's scrubbing the ideas of modernism away. And then if you look up to the far right on the edge there, you'll actually see, oh, that's Stonehenge. And so the more you look, you start to know, oh, and then there's the Sphinx, and there's other things. All of these stones, there's 3 bathers, which again refers to Cezanne. And then by connection, also Picasso. This filmmaker is scrubbing history of meaning, some of the philosophy of postmodernism of scrubbing past meanings. And so Tansey always makes these kind of visual puns, visual stories related to criticism and modernism and postmodernism. Very, very smart and interesting paintings that one really has to think about. They make conceptual sense, but they make absolutely no visual sense, because obviously a cow is not that size and Stonehenge is not that size, etc. '63, Gustave Moreau, The Apparition, 1874. What a cool painting. So somewhere around this time, there was this emergence of what was called symbolism. An artist really sort of getting into the idea, so exactly of what the previous painting is trying to get rid of, the idea of symbolism and storytelling and ethereal concepts and mythology and magic, elegant, dreamlike image. And one of the things that I want to talk about with this painting is the thinness versus the thickness, or transparency versus opacity. So in painting, you have the option of painting transparent, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, or opaque, right? So meaning you can see through the paint, you can't see through the paint, you can see through the paint somewhat. And he's got a beautiful mix of those things. So in the architecture, when you zoom into the architecture, you see all these semi-transparent layers built over each other that create that architecture through layering and layering and layering. And yet, when you look at the figure, when you look at the floating head, those opaque colors, the white around the head, the white of the body, they're very opaque, they're very solid, they're not transparent. And so really mastering that concept of opaque and transparent and the various degrees of which you can use it, which is something to think about in your work. Is all of your paint always opaque? Is all of your paint always transparent? Do you think about those elements? Do you utilize those elements? Can you utilize those elements to make a more complex, really interesting surface that, again, just looks cool? I can't emphasize this enough, as a surface. Yeah, it looks like a building, columns in a building, but it just looks cool as paint on canvas. Think about that, people. Does it just look cool as paint on canvas? What is your job as an artist? Make it look cool. or whatever word you want, dope, straight, fire, fat, whatever generation you're from. '62, Robert Campen, the Annunciation Triptych. 1427. So we were way back, centuries and centuries ago, at a very, very, very different time. And here we have an artist in the northern tradition of Europe of trying to master realism. We see here in this center panel trying to master one-point perspective and having some issues with that, where some things kind of line up the way they would and some things kind of don't. Versus, so there's that idea of perspective and depth versus the solidity and complexity of cloth. And notice how these things kind of separate from each other. Like, for example, the table just kind of floats, and the objects on the table are sort of sitting on the table, but not exactly sitting on the table. And this really strong angle of the bench that the woman is leaning on, and is she leaning on that? And then the kind of flatness and fracturedness of the cloth, that does not feel like cloth, right? It's very sharp. It's very sculptural. It actually looks more like marble that's carved to be cloth rather than cloth as cloth. Joseph over here, his cloth looks a little more like cloth. So this artist is trying to figure out this one-point perspective and how to make that work. And that took centuries for artists to truly master that sense of perspective and depth and how things actually create the illusion of depth. But the other thing about the Northern painting, of course, is their love of detail. Just the immense amount of detail, every little thing. Like, for example, all of that information in the buildings way outside the window of Joseph's studio, and all the little tools that Joseph is using, and little nails and bits of sawdust, and the patterning of the screens in the windows, and the shine of the pot, and the nails on the door. I mean, just all of that fascinating detail that was so important to Northern artists, and they were so obsessed with capturing every little essence of every little thing in their paintings so that everything is seen exactly the same, right? There's, in a sense, no depth of field. There's no atmospheric perspective. Everything is seen the same way. So there's this dichotomy between trying to create depth and painting every little thing as if you're standing right next to it. And you can see that dichotomy in this painting. And you can see the love of detail that Northern artists had in their paintings. Lastly, painting 61, Jacques-Louis David, Oath of the Horatii, 1784. So this might be one of my first paintings that comes up in every list and every textbook and every great artist list that's ever been made, because it is a great painting. So, story-wise, this is an oath of the Horatii family, triplets who are going to fight another family in a symbolic war, decided by triplet against triplet rather than army against army. And this is the moment when the father is saying, you must swear your lives to the state, right? This is actually a painting, sort of a propaganda painting about the power of the state and loyalty. You must honor your lives to the state. And the family over here, don't worry about them. They're going to cry. Don't worry about it. The state is more important than family. Your oath is the most important thing. Your oath to the state, your oath to the country, your oath to the politicians, your oath to the ruler. That's really what this painting is about, right? Which is kind of interesting in our current time. So that's the story. The other part about this painting is the style, which is called neoclassicism. So at this time, much art was a sort of frivolous court art called the Rococo that was all about decadence and the lives of the elite and just sort of like an excess, right? Gold leaf, like Trump's ballroom, an excess. And so here we're back, why it's called neoclassicism, new classicism, classic going back to Rome, Greco-Roman architecture and carving, sculpture, which this is sort of based on, a relief carving, the idea of a relief carving, and away from all of that frivolousness. So this is like, oh, the state is more important than the ruler in a sense, right? Which is sort of the beginning of democracy in some way, right? In some early birth way. And then the last thing I want to talk about with this painting is how he created a triptych without creating a triptych. And hopefully you can see that. So we have the three arches. So again, back to the whole idea of a triptych and an altarpiece, the three arches, and then three groupings, one grouping under each arch. So we have the three sons under one arch, the father, the patriarch under the other arch, and then the grieving sisters and wives on the third arch. And so he's created this kind of triptych without actually creating a triptych. Interestingly, the last thing I want to say about this story, after the battle, there was one boy left alive who then slayed his sister because his sister was betrothed to the enemy. It's an interesting part of the story. But with neoclassical, we have a return to rendering and the body, right, and painting everything meticulously, and we don't see any brushwork. We are back to the idea that the paint is a slave to the image and that the artist's sole goal is to create that realistic rendered image of his subject, that anthropomorphic, right, that comes from classic art, classic Greco-Roman art, the anthropomorphic vision of painting human figures as real. And of course, David did that wonderfully. Wow, so that is our final painting of this video. Please consider subscribing and sharing and liking. And please leave comments. What do you think about these paintings? What do you think about the comments of the paintings? Let me know what's going on. Appreciate it. Keep your eye out for more videos soon. It takes me a little while to get these done, but I'm trying to get them posted as soon as I am able. See you next time.